daylighting of Shockoe Creek is something I'm particularly interested in because I do think that along with history, along with process, we're in danger of losing that natural feature. We've already kind of lost it, it's been put underground. But if they build a stadium and they just pour more concrete over it, then I think it could be really lost. And I think it really is a possible key to solving the flood issues in Shockoe Bottom. And so I think it's really important. And you know, I've heard various things. You know, the idea of the stadium as a solution, I have not heard any reply in terms of the engineering involved. People ask about the engineering involved in that. So I'm kind of skeptical with that. I've heard people say that the cost of daylighting Shockoe Creek and reworking the sewer overflow and all that, I've heard ridiculous figures cited of $200 million and just crazy figures that I haven't seen any backing for those either. And from what I've seen from other cities, it would actually be significantly less, maybe a few million to really daylight Shockoe Creek. And I guess, I understand the points you made about this coming from African history perspective. Respect that. And I'm with the Sierra Club, and I can only do so much. And I guess my suggestion is that the African leadership ask the James River Association, ask the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, ask them to make Shockoe Creek a real cause. Because I think a lot of them are sitting on the sidelines a little bit because they rely on a lot of corporate funders. And I think if you go to them and make the point that this is a significant part of this plan, of this alternative plan, and it is a significant part of the natural element that's going to be lost with the stadium plan, I think you might be able to bring them over to actually contribute to the alternative plan. And that sort of expertise is, and basically calling bull on a lot of these ridiculous engineering mumbo jumbo and figures is important, I think. So I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you. Question. Marty.
Good evening, everybody. I've been curious all along as to how much energy we should put in just literally throwing down on demanding that a true and honest scientific determination of the boundaries that we determine is sacred ground. Mm-hmm. I don't care how far east that line should go. We need an honest determination, and I don't think we've ever had one.
No.
And so, before anything should happen there, I think that ought to be demand number one, that line of demarcation be established.
To speak directly to that, we do have, so you can see that one of the priorities, I hope it's on there, number 3, is that archaeology must inform all development and construction going forward.
Yeah.
And, but to your specific point, the struggle for this area, the struggle for Shockoe Bottom, really for the burial ground originally, the original initial request was that archaeology be done, so that we would know. From the beginning, this has been about the right to know. We want to know what is there. We know the burial ground is there, but we don't know exactly where and how big it is, or how small it might have been. And we do have some anecdotes that refer to it. So there are sort of ways to sort of to guess what those parameters might actually be for the burial ground itself. But at the same time, we know that the landscape has changed significantly, so it's a little difficult to sort of apply what existed then to what exists now. Regardless, that is true. And a study was done to evaluate a Department of Historic Resources study that said the only way that we're going to know is by doing physical archaeology in that area. There's been lots of, there have been, I understand that the Slave Trail Commission did actually accept an assessment, the term is, they used radar, and it was a utilities company that does this for large development projects. And they used their radar process and an old map that was used in a lawsuit back in the early 1800s in order to identify where Shockoe Creek was at that time. They could not, because none of them were archaeologists, and they did not approach this from a perspective of that kind of knowledge. But the best that they could do was to identify where Shockoe Creek actually lay at that time. And based on what they figured out by comparing that map to their radar soundings, they determined a particular path and have said, therefore, the burial ground probably only exists in that little strip that VCU originally identified as what they would be willing to give up. But we are still faced with the fact that that is conjecture. And the only way to actually know is to do the archaeology. It's the only way that we know how valuable Lumpkin's Jail as an historical and archaeological site has become to the world. If in 2008 it was determined, or 2010 when the report came out, and it was publicized through Smithsonian Institution, through their magazine, that was the most significant archaeological site of that year. And that is important to the world.
And that cost about $15,000 to do that.
I think the initial one, but not the second phase. Yeah, the second phase may have been in the 5-6 digits. Yeah.
Can I get a follow-up and ask, because I'm coming in late on this deal.
Sure.
How much have we done outreach to agencies like Save America's Treasures, which is a part of the U.S. Park Service, Interior Department, the Interior Department itself to come in here and put their hands on this, what was the other one? There's several agencies that ought to have an interest in this.
Well, yeah, yes, I think that's probably true, and I think that we have taken the perspective of trying to work from within this community to try and get this community to rise up and defend its historic sites first. And that's been sort of the bulk of our particular trajectory. It doesn't mean that anyone else out there doesn't have the ability to take on those particular things. We've had people say, why don't you go get Oprah to be interested in this, and why don't you find, we have actually approached people like Henry Louis Gates and, other figures who have demonstrated an interest in this area. We know there are people who have worked on the National Historic designation, and as she referenced that Kim Chen actually did work to improve the designation that it does have. It is covered, the Shockoe Bottom area is covered by one historic designation. But it was done in the mid-1980s, and nowhere in that documentation did it reference the history of slavery as part of what was significant about this area. And so in 2010, she had been working on that from at least 2003 or 4. And in 2010, she submitted the work to expand that designation, and that did take place. Unfortunately, it's not a designation that automatically protects the site, but it does help build the case. So the Department of Historic Resources here in Virginia has documentation about a lot of the areas down there. Now, it does have that recognition on a national level, but it, again, is not in such a way that it actually protects it. In terms of reaching out to those, some of those agencies that you've talked about, I think those are viable things that we really do need to consider. And I think the only reason that some of these things that seem logical to some people haven't happened yet, it's been person power. It's really simply been person power, not actually having people who can take those things, because you can't just make a phone call and find out and do. These things take dedicated time and commitment to follow it all the way through what can be processes that take years. Yes, and then
kind of to follow up on the historic zoning. What kind of, in terms of getting a historic district overlay or something more significant like UNESCO or National Heritage Site, how would that, both with the timing of that either prior to development or after development, how would those designations affect development, whether it's the mayor's plan or the memorial district plan, in terms of like, obviously you can't build a baseball stadium if there's a historic district. How would that affect maybe a park or something like that?
Well, we would have to find those things out. And that's why I say that our alternative vision is that. It is to give people another way of looking at this area and this site. While we have declared that we think that there's a particular area that should be off limits regardless, in terms of what does happen down there, it is a community process, and that community process is also going to be informed. You know, what we have not been able to have, we always seem to get the information after the fact, right? So the mayor and Metro Richmond and those folks, they crafted it, and they made sure that they crossed all their T's and dotted at least the ones they thought they needed to before they presented it to us, and then told us the only way that this is going to work is if you take the whole thing, and that's it, period. So that's it. And what we're saying is that no, we don't agree with that process, and we don't believe that you have respected us enough to give us enough information about this area for us to even be able to weigh in, you know, appropriately. If you're not going to inform the people, I mean, that's what our education system was supposed to be all. We're supposed to be educated, you know, Americans who therefore can vote, you know, with an understanding of what system we are operating in, and I believe that this applies in this circumstance. I believe it's one of the reasons why we have been at this, and we're such a tiny group, if you really look at us, right? We are such a tiny group, but we have an ability to tap into the fact and to listen to people, to find out what it is that resonates with people about what's happening in Shockoe Bottom, because it is representative of what's happening in other ways in our community. What's happening in terms of public housing and the way that that is being, you know, redeveloped, and the way that the U.S. HUD came through several years ago and said all those public housing projects now have to be self-sustaining. They all have to turn a profit, or they at least have to pay for themselves, which totally,
Asset management.
asset management, they got a name for it, right? So,
Let me interject right there.
Yeah.
When she talks about public housing, what people fail to really realize is that when they talk about the redevelopment of that area, the mixed-use income is not going to allow the persons who are presently in public housing to re-qualify. So we have to be real clear that 30% and the generational deficits and economic discrimination that has been done all of these years has not really been a clear enough pathway for people who are presently in public housing to be economically on any kind of glide path or pathway or whatever metaphor you want to use in order to re-qualify to get back. So even the 30% threshold is going to be a struggle to achieve in the re-qualification. I'm not going to be able to qualify, you know, and I know many other folks in the same venue, so we may have 5 to 20% that may qualify, and it may be closer to 5% and not to 20%. So you have still 15% to the 30% that are really not going to get back in public housing, which if you look at what has happened in Chicago or Atlanta, it's an exorbitant increase in crime. You know, you can act like it's not on any kind of relational pathway, but anybody got a half an ounce of sense will understand that they tore down 20,000 plus units in Chicago, Robert Taylor homes, plus Cabrini Green. Fast forward 10, 12 years, you got 500 murders a year. You know, do the math.
Can we hear from some of our young voices here? I'm really curious about your response to any of the information, if it was new to you or just...
I'm going to let this woman ask the question, and then the gentleman.
I know that when 95 was built, when that came through, was like about 1952 or something like that, wasn't it? Was there, and I should know this, but I don't, was there a law in place that said that an archaeological survey had to be done before state highway is built? Because that is the law now.
Right.
But
I don't think so, and I believe Yeah, I remember having these kinds of conversations back in 2002, when we were sort of first talking about it and asking those kinds of questions, thinking that that would have some impact. And the Department of Historic Resources at that time let us know that no, these kinds of laws did not exist at that time.
Okay, and so they pretty much, any evidence, which a lot of people have said, well, most of the graveyard was destroyed during building of 95 anyway, and so, but they're not willing to,
Well, nobody's
tell
willing
you
to
how
uproot.
they know that,
Yeah,
or-
nobody's willing to uproot 95, and there are a lot of anecdotes from workers who worked on the highway and other areas about having found remains in different places. It's not as likely that those are specifically the ones from the African burial ground, just because the historic layer is much lower than 95. So it isn't that 95 would have destroyed what was there, it is that it's built on top of it. So that's, equally difficult. But there were other areas, like apparently there was a burial ground associated with the church up on the hill, the First African Baptist Church, and people talked about, remains coming out of the hillside when they were working there. And so there are stories like that, sort of all along the way where there, any place, really very much wherever there has been a church, in a community, there's usually an associated, burial ground. And so those kinds of stories do come up. We have an interesting history of both honoring our dead and just plowing right through them.
right. Well, I mean, it concerns me because a lot of this property is privately owned, and privately owned property does not have to have an archaeological survey before it's developed, so, that's pretty much a courtesy.
It is a courtesy, yeah. On the one hand, it's a courtesy, but I believe that in Shockoe Bottom, for any commercial development, they do have to do archaeology. Not in every case.
And only if there's federal money present, it would trigger the section 106 review. If it's private.
Okay, so for example, there was the apartment complex, the apartment building behind the McDonald's. There was federal money involved in that building as well?
If there's traces of federal money. For example, when the new Marriott, the First Freedoms thing, there was no archaeology done as part of that because there was no requirement, because it was all private money. So even though there's a known site, which is the reason why it's there was no archaeology required, no archaeology.
So again, it's incumbent on us to demand it.
Yes.
And
Right.
just the First African Church, it would make a great project, a research project. Some of the families, many of the families who come out of First African are still alive and well and worship at First African, which has been relocated to the north side. And so they can really tell you, there are folks who can tell you if their relatives were buried there. And so that work can be done, that research can be done to reclaim.
83-year-old Governor Doug Wild is a member of that church. And he could probably provide much. He and his family.
So we put the spotlight right back on you guys because you're in the front row. And we know you got ideas or questions or thoughts, comments, opinions.
It was just mind-boggling, more or less disturbed that a lot of this stuff is relatively new to me. I feel like, only certain times of the year we learn these things. February come around and we learn a lot of history and our ancestors and everything. Other than that, we didn't get a glimpse at it until February. So I'm looking forward to just getting clarification now.
I could say even in February, like we don't get to learn about what happened here.
Right.
Like, you might hear some names, certain things might jump up at you that you relate to in school or just through conversation with random people, but you really don't get to learn what happened where you are currently living. And that's real interesting to be a part of saving our struggle. I'd say that.
I feel like it's his story.
Right.
That's what it is.
I wonder what difference might it make? What difference does it make that you know this now?
It changed your outlook. It's a struggle worth fighting for. Like, it's a lot of young guys who go through meaningless situations, and it affects their lives so terribly. But this is a struggle that's actually worth fighting, and I think if more people were involved, like, we could take it somewhere else and open the eyes of more people in the country, not just the country, but the world, to what happened here. And I think that would be a good thing.
All I want to do now is tell more people about this. Because I know if I was like this, it's got 100,000 other kids just like me. You know? So I'm going to open people's eyes now.
I mean, that's like, can I jump up and down now? Because that's the whole point. I mean, you know, wrapped up around a lot of other whole points, right? Is that knowing this history should empower you. Knowing this history should make you feel, you know, like you can take it and run with it, and you can learn more. And it goes to education. It goes to the fact that 10 years ago I could have talked about 3 minutes about what I knew about Shockoe Bottom or Gabriel or any of this stuff. The same, Harriet Tubman, I knew a little. Actually, I found out more since then. And part of it is because that became a touch point. It was like, okay, here's Gabriel's life. And so it was about the rebellion. And then another time it was like, okay, he was born in 1776 and died in 1800. Well, that's the first 25 years of this country's history. The first 25 years of independence. It's a brand new country. What does it mean to be a brand new country, right? So then I go read about that, and that's when I found out about the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution is like the biggest thing to happen in the New World ever. They were the first people, the first colonized, enslaved people to actually fight for 13 miserable, god-awful, bloody, horrible years and achieve independence. And present-day Haiti is still living the aftermath of having achieved that independence and that freedom to this day. So it's about what's happening now. History is not just then. It's now. It's all about us and how we deal with things like this. So it's really exciting to hear you get excited. We flipped a switch. That is why we do it. Yes.
I could not help but respond because of some of the parallels. And it's really interesting that Haiti paid reparations to the nation of France all the way until 1945. They were enslaved by France. They fought and won their freedom, but they wind up paying reparations all the way until 1945, and I think maybe even a few years beyond that. But what is also significant for me is that the Confederacy did not win the war. They lost the Civil War. We had all the monuments, all the history, and in fact, probably one of the most significant portions of American history, and particularly in Virginia, has been about the Confederacy. As a young man, I remember seeing the first significant book written by a black person other than Jackie Robinson and Booker T. Washington when I was in Germany in 1960. And of course, that was the beginning of changes and a revolution. But can you imagine, the Confederacy lost the war, but they began to raise up monuments to their folks who had been traitors to this nation. I'm floored when I think that a few days after Abraham Lincoln came into Richmond, that slaves, if they wanted to travel in the city of Richmond at night, they had to go to former Confederates to get passes so they could walk through the streets of Richmond. And that's how significant this all is, because it has been submerged. I've been in Richmond over 40-some years now, and this is the first time, and I say in the last maybe 10 years or so, that things have started to gradually burst open. And it is so sad that our young people like yourself are not aware of this history. But I hope that this is the beginning of a new day and that we can begin to tell the story and tell it to our children and our grandchildren.
Can I say, you had your hand up a little while ago, and then Marty. Yeah.
I'm just curious as to what we all think about this alternative plan. I think it's a wonderful plan, this proposal. But what can we get some feedback as to where we are on this particular proposal from this group?
So before we go do that, because that could lead to several comments. Marty, did you want to say something?
Yeah, there's a whole chunk of history that I've learned as a student of Virginia Union 100 years ago from Mrs. Pearl Mankins, who taught us ancient African history, #1, but she talked a lot about Richmond history and how all along the riverbank from Oregon Hill or Belvedere East all the way down to the bottom, black folk literally took themselves off the plantation. They hired themselves out, even while their masters hired some of them out. Some of them literally left the plantation with righteous indignation and went to work for the industry that was aggregated along the James River. And they built tin houses, lean-tos and everything. They lived along that riverbank, what we now call Canal Street, between there and the river. And all the way down to Shockoe Bottom. And when you think about the founding of Richmond, around Rockets Landing, the whole neighborhood of Fulton, what we used to call Fulton Bottom, it didn't stop there. It was Shockoe Valley from there all the way down to the bottom here. And so there's a ton of history unrevealed yet that nobody's bothered to do much with until more recently. And Dr. Phil Schwartz, who was an active member on the Slave Trail Commission, has written a ton of it that I think it would do us well to partner with him and see if we can get it. But it seems to me that, I know we were able, Kent Ruffin and I were able to apply for a grant with the help of the U.S. Park Service, and we brought $650,000 to Richmond from the Save America's Treasures grant. We approached them, we can get help from them and various other folks. I've got contacts, some of us got contacts with the Interior Department. If nothing else, we may be able to get help to halt what they're doing until certain things occur. I mean, the absolute indignity that's being expressed in what they're doing is enough to send all of us bonkers.
Scott, and then I think we want to go to the issue of the plan.
You heard me speak about Shockoe Creek, and you heard me say that I do respect the idea that this should be about African history. And to speak to Paul's comment that we need to also think about the present and what needs to happen down there, and some ideas and feedback. The stadium proposal is being pushed from the Chamber of Commerce with the idea that this is a job creator, that this is important for Richmond's economic future. And critics of the alternative plan, who I disagree with, what they're saying is that, oh, you guys don't have the funding, how is this a jobs creator, blah, blah, blah. And so I guess my challenge to y'all is to also think about not just the cultural tourism portion, but also what needs to happen in Shockoe Bottom to make it an economic engine for Richmond. And back when Paul Goldman was running for mayor, he floated the idea of taking a small portion of Shockoe Bottom and extending MCV and making it a world-class medical center, taking advantage of the transportation aspect to make it something easy to travel to and go for treatment, and bring in knowledgeable people who are making lots of money, bring in medical equipment, make it a really rich area. And that had its merits. I'm not saying it was the end all, but one aspect of it that I would also like to bring up is the transportation aspect, because Shockoe Bottom has been a center for transportation for Richmond ever since Richmond was founded. Shockoe Creek, the canals, the river, that's where Richmond was founded because of that. And so, and also Richmond, honestly, at its economic and cultural zenith, in some ways, it was challenging in New York City because of the advent of passenger rail. We still have Main Street Station there. It's not being used as much as it should. There's been talk of high-speed rail ever since I moved to Richmond. It's slow coming. But I do think that seeing Shockoe Bottom not only as a historical center, cultural center, but also as a transportation center has a lot of merit. And I do think that part of that has to do with making sure that people can get into Shockoe Bottom and get out of Shockoe Bottom easily, not just through the passenger rail, which I think is very important, but also through the bus system. And that goes back to the GRTC downtown transfer station. Despite a lot of efforts, the mayor has refused to recognize the idea of putting a downtown transfer station near Main Street Station to be able to have people from all over the area be able to take a GRTC bus and easily get down to the train station and back. And so that's just something I want to leave y'all with is the idea that the transportation aspect could also make Shockoe Bottom a real economic engine for the future of Richmond.
I was wondering if Samantha made it, or as an S, I gave her detailed directions on the GRTC how to get here from City Hall. So I just, no? Okay. It is possible.
Yes, it is. People do it. Yeah.
Does the state have, isn't there an agency, historical agency for the state?
The Department of Historic Resources.
And they've been contacted?
Yeah, they're very well aware.
They're very well aware.
Yes.
But are they able to do anything to maybe put a halt,
No, they don't actually have, they don't really have that kind of jurisdiction. What they can do is they can assess what they consider to be the significance, and frankly, they've done that a couple of times over. But they don't really have any authority to stop anything from happening. Right. If private partners, private landowners want to cooperate and do something, in conjunction with the knowledge and the reporting that they provide, that has happened. But they have not. And frankly, it's going to be interesting. The Department of Historic Resources is an entity which will be a little bit different, I think, going forward, because up until this last year, the person who headed it was really very much tied to the connections to the city, to VCU, and to things like that, and didn't want to step out of those relationships. And she's just this last year taken another job, and there's, I think, an interim director or maybe a new director at this point. And so we're a little hopeful that at least we might be able to draw on what they can do to support these kinds of cases going forward. But
we have a new administration in the state that has a more progressive look at things. Yes. Do you think that we contact them now, or do you say they know? So that means that they know what we're trying to do too.
yeah, they do. But I would say, okay, so we're reaching an interesting point in this too. And I think you want to go ahead. But I'll just the short thing I'll say right is we're reaching an interesting point where people are raising ideas and saying, what have you done this and have you done that? And we have reached a point in this struggle where we all have to pitch in. I'm not going to say, this is not a chastising. We have reached a point at which our voice is one thing, and we have brought into being an alternative vision that people can use to begin to express ideas about what else can be done down there, can be looking at the viability of alternative ways of approaching this, and can get involved. And so every letter or contact that somebody makes with somebody like the Department of Historic Resources and your city councilor, because they know that you are going to be electing them or unelecting them in 2 years, right? All of that counts. You can't let people tell you that. I've had somebody come up to me and say, this is a done deal.
Yeah, I heard that.
So what's up? Why are you bothering? I'm bothering because it's still important. Just because you tell me it's a done deal doesn't mean it's a done deal. City Council may or may not vote on this on Monday night, but they might vote in 2 weeks. Or if Belials has his way and the meetings go to once a month, then it may be a couple months down the road. It really doesn't matter what somebody tells you about the opposition, except that you take it as information to strengthen how you do what you do. So at this moment, you all are the receivers and the beneficiaries of all the work that these people have done up to this moment, and now you get to take from here what you think will be useful and what you think that you can do. Your voice matters.
That's a great segue for what we can do. But before we get there, I just wanted to have us speak to the footprint of the proposed stadium. Because I recall being told initially that no slave-related sites would be affected by the stadium itself, that those slave-related sites were sort of over there. But can we speak to this question of a map? And if in fact slave-related sites would be disturbed underneath the footprint of the stadium?
Well, the thing I would say, thank you, Scott, very much, too good, is that we have a lot to learn, but that there is sufficient information and research that has been done to let us know, and also incidental archaeology, right? So, for example, the apartments behind the McDonald's. They went into that project knowing that it was likely they were going to find a 19th century foundation of the building that had been there before. What they found, in addition to that, was an 18th century foundation, and were able to corroborate the history of the people who built and worked and lived in that building there. And it in fact also played a role in slave trading as well. Terry Brock, who is, I never heard of him before, but when somebody put this out, he's somebody who's very new to Richmond, but this is his field, and he did a piece that's on a blog, and I want to say the blog is called Dirt, but I'm not sure that's it. But in any event, he did a fairly long piece describing the rich field that is Shockoe Bottom, that just below the surface you are going to find original foundations, you are going to find, like we said, the original street grid is still there. And most building that has happened there has happened going up. So whatever is below is still there. Thank you very much for coming. So
Logistically speaking.
So logistically speaking, the baseball stadium will in fact encounter remains. Anything that they do, as soon as and especially since they are talking about going below grade with the baseball stadium. It's apparently 1 foot high at the uphill area, but it's 8 foot. One of the walls is 8 foot high at the lower level towards Franklin Street. The ballpark itself is going to go down 22 feet below grade. That's going to take you right to the 18th century historic layer of Shockoe Bottom, right to where Shockoe Creek actually, lived. So we know it's there. I mean, and there is the thought. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say thought. Part of the process of addressing Shockoe Creek and putting that stadium in there, people have said may engage the Army Corps of Engineers, which is a federal body, and therefore may trigger the Section 106. That means that archaeology will have to be done. Yeah, so, but these things are to be confirmed. So, yeah.
At the last meeting, did I hear you say that based on what happens up at the Diamond when a home run is hit and Nutsy does his squirrel dance down the third base line, that the location of the third base line would in fact be doing his squirrely dance down the very sites where humans bred for bread and held in pens, and the very sites where they were held in pens.
Yeah, literally third base versus second base, third, anyway, whatever. where one of the other really large owners of trading operations had one of his properties, and that was Silas Omohundro.
So what do they mean when they say that it's not going to disturb? It's not going to disturb them, we know that.
Yeah.
But what does it mean? What does it mean that it's not going to disturb any slave-related sites or history? I mean, I don't see how that goes unanswered.
Yeah, none of this should go unanswered, and for the most part, we are trying not to let anything go unanswered. So it's very helpful when other people also weigh in and say, you know what, this matters to me too. It's not just the defenders, it's not just Anna, it's not just Kim. You know, this really does matter to us because we are talking about the very integrity, you know, of our city as a people. It just does. And so you should be raising that as well.
So the question was asked, what do we feel about the proposal? I like what has been started, and I like that it says, if I'm understanding it correctly, that this is a beginning of a dialogue or a process. I would like to see kind of a one voice from the community putting forward at this point that this process in a larger, more structured, systematic way, a Shockoe commission. And that commission shall dump, 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 and dump before anything proceeds. Economic drivers. If I understand what I'm reading as I'm out there following leads and reading articles, there is no bigger economic driver available to this city than this history, and more that's still buried even farther. The history that's buried even farther than the history of the slave pens and is the history of the resistance. Sally Bell, who's referred to in the literature as the mother of the Underground Railroad. This city wasn't just the epicenter of the slave trade, it was the birthing place for the Underground Railroad, for God's sake.
Resistance.
The resistance.
You haven't sent me. You said you were going to send me stuff, and you haven't yet. You got to write it up. You got to write it up.
This works better than the other.
Yeah,
I know, but the point.
Now I have to do it.
No, I
I'm
apologize.
also doing it.
I do apologize. But the point I'm making is that before we go anywhere, we need to know what are our complete set of assets of that territory down there before we can decide where it ought to go. And we ought to demand that they halt the whole thing and that a commission be established and it be funded, and we solicit from the Save the Treasures or whoever, wherever, however, to do a full, complete, exhaustive historical inventory, archaeological research, you know, true, unbiased assessment of the economic value of this history and where it could take us as a city and what it could do for the planet. There's other aspects that have come up tonight.
Yeah.
But I think people are saying, oh, well, you don't have an answer, you don't have a plan, you don't have money, and besides, how's it going to create jobs? Well, it's going to create jobs if it's done right. It's going to create good jobs, and it's going to be a permanent, long-term magnet, not something that we have to start talking about tearing down after 20 years, which was what they did with the diamond. This is a permanent improvement for us as a city and for the economy, and we have to demand it.
So you have to write that, and you have to send it to us, and put it on Facebook, because that way a lot of people get it, but you got to write that. And I ask that of everybody. Your perspective informs all of this, and if they know it's coming from a broader perspective in the community. The other thing is that in particular, gentlemen in the front row, you have a particular burden. And I hope it's a joyous burden to carry forward. Exactly what you said. You can't wait to tell other people. Tell them.
Just speaking real quick, we had set this conversation and the conversation for Saturday, and as we all know, the elected officials will be having a conversation as well. So I want to ask this body if you think that we should still go forth with our conversation, knowing that we need to be a committee of one and engage as often as we can, as humanly possible, and hold the elected officials accountable as well. So as the gentleman or young lady said, this is the beginning of a series of more conversations that we're going to have in order to really beat the drum to get more civic engagement and put other opportunities for additional civic engagement, whether it's a civic association, whether it's a district meeting, whether it's a legacy organization meeting, or just another community organization. We need to get really more active in what's going on, how we become economic drivers ourselves, and how we hold other people accountable for how they have been mismanaging our tax dollars. And and we need to drive that point home as consistently and as loud as we can. So I'm thinking that the prevailing wisdom is that we don't do the Saturday event at the Broad Rock Library, which pains my heart, but I'll yield to everybody else's opinion. So if y'all gonna go to the other city officials' event, then we need to really figure out what our position is on this plan, how we're gonna mobilize and strategize. And forgive me because I did not bring the phone numbers and the emails of the 9 city council people, but it is available online. And we're going to put that information out there more consistently because we need to call somebody's office, email somebody's office, go by somebody's office every day until this thing is defeated.
Well, that clearly is one strategy. I was hoping that Saturday would be an opportunity to set strategies.
I mean, the place is still booked, and if some people want to do a small strategy session, I'm open to go there and do that, because I don't need to listen to the elected officials. So I'm with what we gonna do. We need to be dealing with the people who gonna be making the strategy, and y'all get ready to make me cuss, so I ain't gonna cuss.
I'll throw in well, I shouldn't. My feeling is that we should go to that meeting because it is the last of those public hearings where I believe if they follow true to form, they're going to present again the mayor's plan. And if we are there, and especially if we are there in numbers, then we can challenge it and we can raise the questions and we can really push on it and make sure that in that last meeting before this city council meeting, that they really hear from us our response to it, and we can raise the alternative vision plan there as well. That's I've been thinking back and forth about it too, and that's sort of where I've landed as well, because we are going to hold more of these meetings, and we are beginning to develop what this community strategy is going to be. I'm writing down the ideas that people are mentioning, and it's one of the reasons why I'm saying please continue to submit these ideas, because otherwise, you're leaving it up to us to think up everything, and we're not going to think of everything.
And we're not going to do everything.
Yeah, thank you. That too. Yeah.
So segue back to you calling me out for not having followed through. I have something that I have been following through on. I have a vision. Over on 95, there's these giant LED billboards. And I want to get one up, and I have almost 200 now out of $1,000 it costs for 30 days. Every minute and a half, no Shockoe Stadium. Dear Council, we're watching, we remember, if you vote yes, and this is going to change on the billboard, you're out, the voters.
So how much are you charging for this?
Donations. It's something that's doable, it's something that's loud and bright and will be noticed every minute and a half, 24 hours a day for 30 days in big, bright, in your face. We're watching.
And that was a point that I wanted to bring up also, is, the mayor has his own propaganda machine going with loving RVA, we're loving RVA, we're going to revitalize Richmond, but, obviously they're not really telling the whole story. So what we need to do as organizers and activists is do our own counter-propaganda campaign, which there are some people currently working on some stuff for that, in terms of posters and wheat pasting and stuff that we can make a visible presence, similar to what Alan's talking about, cheaper and more DIY.
Thank you. I'd like to add something, and that is, we say a lot about, well, what's your strategy? What's your strategy? What's your strategy? And to look for a concerted, unified strategy from a small body of people, I think is unrealistic, and it's just not the way that activism is done these days. It's multinodal. And it's flat, so that there's no hierarchy, there's no authority to say you can do this and you can't do that. What Anna was saying earlier was that it's up to each of us. So if you want to form a committee of 2 people and do something, a project, do it. You don't need to ask permission from anybody. You don't need to vet it through anybody. You've already been given permission. They paid the price already. They paid the price, and they're expecting you to step up and do something, each of us.
So where do we input it?
What are we inputting?
Once we come about the strategy individually, well, this is my 3rd meeting. And I'm hearing that there will be a series more. So we can input it there. I'm just first time hearing that there will be a series more.
Right, because we are evolving this as we are going along, that's the other thing. And again, I think to her point, you're waiting for a strategy to evolve. But we need to gather the ideas, but we also, as she just pointed out, need you to act on your own as well. One of the reasons people tend not to do that is because they're not sure about something that they know or don't know. They're not sure if it's going to help or if it's going to hurt. And there have been different issues that have come about along the way with this struggle. And some of it has to do with history, some of it has to do with race, and how you step out in front of it. So that being one of the elephants in the room, I'll go ahead and jump on that.
I just want to go back to what Lily was saying about Saturday, that I think we should attend that city council representative and, let them know that there's a group of people who are definitely opposed to that. Definitely, we should be there, I think.
So everyone do that. Everyone invite people to go and show up at that meeting. It's the New Bill Robertson meeting. It's taking place at 10 o'clock on Saturday. Is it at Main Street Station? I can't remember.
Originally, it was to be at Mosby Middle.
It's in Fulton.
Is it? Oh, probably.
2 different locations.
Because they switched it. It was supposed to be at MLK on like Tuesday or Thursday, and now it's on Saturday. It's this Saturday.
Right.
I'm pretty sure it's down in Fulton.
It's down in
Well,
Okay,
yeah,
well, you know what, it'll be
Palatine.
at the Palatine. Okay, all right. And it'll be on the website for that. So what I will say about the idea of where we are in terms of strategy, I'm getting ready to put out on Facebook as one mechanism, basically a call for people's input. Because it gives us a place for people to comment and put ideas. And it's also public. So people can see the ideas that are being put out and gathered together. And one of my thoughts is that maybe over the period of a month, that we can put together a document that is basically community recommendations for the memorialization of Shockoe Bottom in this area. And the same thing can be done in reference to ideas specific to the alternative vision and sort of the larger development and protection of Shockoe Bottom in terms of that history. You have mentioned a couple of things like some of these agencies potentially that could be useful. If you could write that up and identify those agencies, you have said that you know people in these places. If you can write that up and put that, because we want to compile it, not because I'm going to hold on to it, but because then the next time we come together, we're going to have this documentation from which people can act. Because that's where we are. We have to start acting on these ideas. And there are little ideas and big ideas that all need to happen at the same time in order to take it forward.
And with that, there are things that you can do leaving here. One is to, where's Lily? Do you want to go through this, Lily? Things that people can do?
I'm going to go make this is the list of the phone numbers and
Yeah,
names of
forgive
the city
me, I
council
forgot to
people?
bring those, Joe.
That's okay, I'm gonna go make a copy. Huh?
Some of those too.
More copies of this? Okay.
Yeah, you can go to the No Stadium blog site and sign the anti-Shockoe Stadium petition.
There's a blog spot called shockobottom.blogspot.com, shockobottom.blogspot.com. And that has all kinds of information you can use to share with your friends and family about this struggle. There's the alternative plan is on the website. Some of the handouts that we have here are on that website, and so you can use those to do things like host a party at your house.
When y'all get this piece of paper, you'll see January the 13th. That time is come and gone. So the next meeting opportunity for City Council is January the 27th. As we were saying, we're going to have a vigil at 5 o'clock outside City Hall. Please be a committee of one and bring an additional person, an additional 5 people. You know, knock on somebody's door, say something to them, send them an email, call them on the telephone. You're on the way to the bus, say something to somebody. You'll be surprised at where the opportunity for someone to be engaged will come from.
I know, right? So I take the bus now a lot. And so what I decided to do is get up out of my seat and make it and say something on the bus. You know, I'm scared as all heck because they're gonna look at me like I'm crazy, but that's an opportunity to talk to people, a busload of people on their way to work and going to work. That's an opportunity that I have that is a rare one to speak to our folks.
And then another thing, on the railing and the ceiling, you know, I mean, it's getting real financial. You know, we could take a love offering sometime.
It's
going
only
forward.
$20.
You can do the advertisement on the inside. I want to say it's as little as $25 for a particular period of time.
Is there a hard copy petition form that we can distribute? The petition form.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So anyone that haven't signed it now, we
I'm
can
a
sign
dinosaur,
it.
I can't make that sucker work to save my life on my computer.
What I've done in the past has been successful is really do some template letters. So that's going to be something that we're going to attempt to do, which is all of us have like a certain group of grievances that we have. So we can start with maybe 2 or 3 things that, you know, all of us agree on as a form letter, and then leave some blank spaces for people to write what additionally speak to their spirit with respect to that, and then we can share it with the city council people and other folks. Letters, editor, and then if you're members of civic associations, attend those, student groups, religious institutions. One particular ask that I've had on Facebook is that anybody that are a member of the churches that pastors supported the opposition to the stadium is to take your tithe money and give it to another worthwhile in the trenches ministry. You know, help us get that ad on the bus, you know, so that the pastors will see. There was an article in the Free Press over here where Haskell has provided some reservation to their open 100% agreement with the mayor. So now they're really asking some questions and got a little bit of pushback going on.
The Baptist Ministers Conference.
Yeah, Haskell.
Yeah, everybody that know Haskell, I'm saying, that's the Baptist Ministers Conference that endorsed the mayor's plan. They're starting to have some second thoughts.
So, even if you're not a member of a sorority or fraternity or union, you may know somebody. Strike up a conversation, and then that information will help to inform, you know, some conscious objective. And then, of course, contact your city council representative, send them an email, call them on the phone, stop by the office. And if it's any other suggestions that you have for advocacy, you know, feel free to get in touch with Kim, Anna, me, anybody, Kwame.
But remember that shockobottom.blogspot.com, because there's going to be a space on there for you to contact us and to give your input about the plan and what we can do next.
And go to the Facebook page and post it, and that's another way, inbox somebody as well.
Facebook, Shockoe Bottom Blogspot. Send it to your friends.
I heard someone say that there's going to be a series of these meetings, so they're going to be in different neighborhoods. Yes, okay.
So if you have a suggestion for a spot, that would be great. Anybody have a suggestion for a spot?
Well, the DC Partnership building in Carver sometimes is free. All we have to do is call and ask for it.
Would you take that on?
Yeah, but I'm not sure when I'll ask for it. I mean, that's the thing, is we have to decide on a date. I worry about when you say don't wait, but just be active. Being active is a very good thing for word of mouth, but when you get too many events going and people are spread too thin and they don't know which thing is the most important to go to, sometimes it makes things a little flat. So it is important for us to gather sometimes in a really well thought out place and time, so that it's not conflicting with other people's meetings and actions and things like that, so that we can all be more of a massive group, and that's what kind of worries me about. I mean, I'm not saying don't be active, because that's
You just want to
key.
coordinate. Right. So when you see stuff on Facebook or somebody sending an email, I would just say if you have a particular unreadiness to inbox somebody, and ask the question, and then if we're posting and ask you to repost, to really do that so that we can raise more awareness and then have a direct where we need to be in order to what we're going to do.
I would say in response to your hesitation, make the initial contact, see when they're available, and then you can go from there. And then say, they have these open dates, then you can, if you're not sure if one of those dates would work best, then you can ask other people, be like, would this be a good date? Oh, there's already a meeting happening that day. Okay, let's pick on that day. Something like that. So making that initial contact and figuring out when the space is available, I think that's half the battle right there. And then you can just organize from that point.
And within the next 30 days, how many opportunities do we have to meet there? And then pull those dates for us, and then we can decide and then get back with it.
This spot is kind of small for like too huge of a gathering. This would be probably the maximum that room would fit, but I can contact them anytime, so it's not a big deal. I don't know.
I would just like to mention, I think historically the boycott has been a very effective tool. I think that's one thing that would put the fear of God into the squirrels. When people are calling for a boycott, you build it and we will not come. And I think that's one thing that would really, they don't care about the history, they don't care about the tuning, they care about their money, and if you get them where it hurts, you threaten to boycott, you build that stadium there and we won't come, and I think that you could get not only city residents, but you could get county residents signing a boycott. We will not come there if you build it. For a lot of different reasons, people in the county might not think it's safe.
Well, that might be an action that someone who is an avid, fan may want to take on, is doing just that kind of thing.
The majority of the people that go to the Diamond anyway are mostly from surrounding Richmond. Richmond is not the audience for the baseball.
Many of whom have said they're not coming to the bottom anyway. They're not going to bring their 10-year-old to leave out of a baseball game at 10 o'clock at night in the bar.
In the bar.
So,
All right, who has the time?
for what it's worth, I got a phone call.
10 after.
9:10.
I got a phone call this evening that says that the corporate crowd is going to have a demonstration at City Hall Monday night at the same time we are. So,
We really need to get out. We
yeah.
need to be there.
all of that partners are gonna join.
Okay, so it's 9:10. We said that we'd be done by 8:30, so I want to acknowledge that it's not 8:30, that we are over time, and that it won't happen again. As long as we get there on time, right? And I want to say, and each of us can say thank you for coming. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. It's so heartening, because sometimes it feels like, for me anyway, that I'm alone. And so it's so good to see us be together and to come together, even if we don't always agree. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Very good, very good.